She came to Mercy Trauma Center the way most nurses do, quietly, without fanfare, without anyone asking questions. Dr. Harlan Voss, chief of surgery, didn't bother learning her name. To him, she was just the new nurse. Replaceable, forgettable. The kind of woman you talk over and look past. But the day 6 Navy SEALs came through those doors, bleeding and broken, something shifted in her. Her spine straightened. Her hands went still. And when Rear Admiral Marcus Webb, the man who commands every SEAL team on American soil, walked down that corridor, stopped dead in his tracks, and said "Admiral" to the woman in blue scrubs. Every doctor in that room forgot how to breathe. She wasn't just a nurse. She had never been just a nurse. And the man who spent months making her feel small was about to learn what it costs to underestimate the wrong woman. If this story hits you somewhere deep, hit that like button and let it run. Then drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from right now. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome. You just found secrets of silent badges. Hit subscribe and stay close. You're going to want to hear what comes next.
Move. You're in the way. She stepped aside before she even registered the words. That was the reflex. Step, clear, don't engage. Dr. Harlan Voss didn't look back. He never did. He moved through the trauma bay like a man who had never once considered that other people had weight, had presence, had names worth knowing. She watched him go. Her name was Claire Maddox, 36 years old, 5'6", dark hair cut close to the skull, practical and unadorned, green eyes that catalogued everything and gave back nothing. She had been at Mercy Trauma Center for 11 weeks. In that time, Voss had called her Nurse, Hey, and once, memorably, the one with the short hair. He had never called her Claire. She didn't correct him. She picked up the chart he had dropped on the floor, not on the counter, on the floor, and placed it back where it belonged. Her hands were steady. They were always steady, even when everything else about her performance suggested they should not be. The morning had started the way most mornings started at a Level 1 facility. Crowded, loud. The kind of noise that had texture. Overlapping voices, wheeled equipment, the particular percussion of a trauma center absorbing whatever the city chose to produce. GSWs, multi-vehicle accidents. Industrial injuries that arrived with their own specific horror, cases that separated the experienced from the pretenders inside the first 60 seconds. Claire was good at her job. Everyone knew it, even if no one said it aloud. Voss would never say it. Maddox. That was Dr. Patrice Okafor, the charge nurse. Coming around the station with a tablet pressed to her chest. Voss wants the Henderson chart reconciled before rounds. It's already done. Patrice stopped. He just asked, 20 minutes ago. I heard him from the supply room. It's done. A pause. Something careful moved behind Patrice's eyes. You want me to tell him that? You can tell him whatever you'd like. Patrice almost smiled. Then she moved on and Claire turned back to the supply cart she had been restocking. She counted syringes. She counted gauze rolls. She organized by expiration date, left to right. Without thinking about it, the way a person organizes things when order has been trained into the body rather than chosen by the mind. She was aware of everything in the room without looking at it. Footsteps behind her, Voss, returning from radiology, longer stride on the right. Old knee injury, compensated but not fully corrected. Probably a lateral meniscus tear, never properly rehabbed. Wheels to her left, crash cart being repositioned. Deshawn, the orderly, parking it 3 inches too far from the wall again. A voice from Bay 3, patient distress, but not physiological. Anxiety pattern. She could tell from the cadence, she noted all of it, filed it, moved on. It was not a nurse skill. She knew that. Nurses were trained to observe, yes, but not like this. Not the way she did it, automatically, constantly, converting every sound and shadow and shift in body language into a quiet running map of the room. That particular skill had been built somewhere else. In rooms and environments she did not think about during the day. She thought about them at night sometimes, against her preference. You. Voss again. He was pointing in her general direction, which was his preferred method of addressing people when their names escaped him or simply didn't matter. 16 gauge Bay 2, patient's been waiting. She was already moving. She saw him register that. The slight pause in his step, the fractional narrowing of his eyes. He didn't like efficiency he hadn't requested. It displaced him. She set the needle on the tray without comment and stepped back to her original position. "Took you long enough," he said. 43 seconds had passed since he'd spoken. She did not respond. This was the shape of it. This was the architecture she had built here, deliberately and with some care. Quiet, capable, present without being visible. Do the work. Do it correctly. Don't be noticed doing it well enough to invite questions. Don't give anyone a reason to ask where she had trained, or what she had done before this, or why a woman with hands and eyes like hers was working a floor position at a civilian trauma center instead of somewhere that might have used her differently. Questions were doors. She kept them closed. The morning moved. Patients came and went. A man with a construction nail through the center of his left palm, calm in the way that shock sometimes produced calmness. A teenager with a closed head injury from a fall, scared and asking the same question on a loop. A woman in her 60s, septic, whose veins had stopped cooperating with anyone who tried to start a line. The attending had been on his third attempt when Claire came to the bedside. "May I?" He stepped back, slightly irritated, mostly relieved. She found the vein on the first pass, a small one, barely visible, hidden in the crease of the inner wrist. She had used a flashlight and 2 fingers, and the same stillness she brought to everything. The woman exhaled. The attending thanked her with a tone that contained almost no gratitude. She smiled with a smile that contained almost no warmth. They understood each other perfectly. By early afternoon, the bay had settled into its midday rhythm. Lower volume, paperwork accumulating, the specific exhaustion of a trauma floor between surges. Voss reappeared at the central station. 2 residents trailed him. He was performing again, the lecture while moving, the voice calibrated to carry, the manner of a man reminding every room he entered of its own hierarchy. "A trauma nurse's job," he was saying, "is to support the physician's decision-making process, not to anticipate, not to interpret. Support." One resident nodded. The other glanced briefly at Claire. She was charting. Her expression was neutral. Her pen moved at the same steady pace it always moved. "Certain habits develop in this department," Voss continued, still not lowering his voice. "When staff overstep their scope, it creates confusion. It creates liability. I've seen it derail entire cases." He wasn't looking at her. He didn't need to. She kept charting. Her jaw was very still. The pen kept moving. In another life, the one she didn't discuss, the one she had sealed off with the same precision she applied to everything else, she had given briefings to rooms full of men with stars on their collars. She had stood in front of operational maps and spoken in the flat, clear language of command, and those men had listened and they had acted on what she told them, and people had lived because of it. In this life, she charted. She charted and she counted gauze, and she let men like Harlan Voss perform their authority at her, because the alternative required explaining things she had decided not to explain. Required becoming visible in a way she had decided, with considerable deliberateness, not to become. Not here, maybe not anywhere, not anymore. Patrice appeared at her elbow, quiet, deliberate. "You okay?" "Fine. He does this to everyone, not just you." "I know. It tends to bother people more than they let on." Claire looked up from the chart, just briefly. "It doesn't bother me." It wasn't entirely a lie. It was something more complicated, a truth that had traveled through so many layers of training and conditioning that it had come out the other side looking like indifference. She had been built to absorb pressure, to convert it into stillness rather than reaction. Whatever Harlan Voss believed he was doing to her, he was operating at a fraction of the force she had already survived. She went back to charting. At 2:17, the radio crackled. EMS frequency, patched into the trauma bay speakers during active transports. It crackled once, the specific sound of a channel opening under pressure. And then a voice came through, controlled, clipped. The cadence of someone managing a deteriorating situation rather than simply reporting on one. Mercy Trauma. This is Unit 44. Inbound with 6 casualties, multiple GSWs, blast pattern injuries, 1 critical with junctional hemorrhage, femoral. ETA is 4 minutes. Requesting full level 1 activation. 6 casualties. The room changed. It wasn't dramatic. It was a compression, a specific shift in the air of the place, the way a trauma bay changes when it understands it is about to be tested beyond its comfortable range. Voss straightened. His residence straightened. Patrice moved to the activation panel with her hand already extended. Claire set down her pen. She did not move from the station. Not yet. She stood with both hands flat on the counter and her eyes fixed on the ambulance bay doors, and something behind those green eyes went extremely quiet. Junctional hemorrhage, femoral, 4 minutes. She had controlled a femoral bleed once with nothing but pressure and improvised packing in the dark, in a location she was not cleared to name, in conditions that should have made the patient's survival statistically implausible. He had survived. He had gone on to serve. She had never written it in any report that anyone outside a classified compartment would ever read. Not now. Her pen came up off the counter, charting until the doors opened. That was the plan. Keep the pen moving and let the work make thinking unnecessary, but her hands stayed flat on the counter, and her eyes stayed on the doors. And the part of her that had never actually left. The part that lived in the space between the woman she was pretending to be and the one she had spent 15 years becoming. That part was already calculating. 4 minutes. Femoral junctional hemorrhage. She knew exactly what would be needed. She knew exactly what Voss would miss. They heard them before they saw them. The ambulance bay doors blew open at 2:21, and the sound that came through was not the usual sound of an emergency transport. It was bigger, denser, the particular acoustic signature of multiple gurneys moving fast, multiple voices overlapping, and underneath all of it, the low, controlled frequency of men trained not to make noise even when they were in pain. 6 of them. 4 ambulances and a black SUV that had no business being in a hospital bay, but was there anyway, doors already open. A man in tactical clothing stepping out before the vehicle fully stopped. Claire saw it from the station. She stayed where she was. The first gurney came through, and she catalogued it in under 2 seconds. Male, mid-30s, dark beard, left arm tourniquet above the elbow, conscious but grey, the specific grey of someone who has been losing blood for longer than the medic's report would indicate. The second, bilateral leg injuries, one already splintered in the field, the other wrapped in something that was not standard EMS gauze. It was combat gauze, kaolin packed, the military variant, and whoever had applied it correctly. The third gurney moved faster than the others. That was the critical one. She knew it before she could see the injury. She knew it from the way the EMS team moved around it. The specific urgency of people managing a situation they understood was narrowing. Junctional femoral, approximately 14 minutes, the lead medic said, handing off to the charge team. Combat application tourniquet proximal placement, unable to achieve full hemorrhage control. Pressure dressing applied, saturation in under 4. BP was 72 on scene. We've got 1 line. Pushed 500 saline. He's at... Bay 1, Voss said. Already moving. Already performing. The critical gurney rolled past the station. Claire looked at the patient. Male. Late 20s. Built the way men who do that work are built. Not large, but dense. The kind of physical conditioning that doesn't show until something goes wrong and you realize there is nothing soft anywhere in the structure. His face was the color of old concrete. His hands, resting at his sides, were the hands of someone who had stopped gripping things. That was the part that told her the most. The hands. She looked away. She went back to the chart in front of her. Her pen touched the paper. Did not move. I need a second line and cross-match now. Voss in Bay 1, establishing command. His voice was good in emergencies. She would give him that. It carried, it organized. It reassured people who needed the sound of confidence more than they needed actual competence. She heard the vitals come through the monitor. Systolic at 68. Heart rate 112 and climbing. She heard Voss call for packed red blood cells, then the vascular surgeon on call. Then came a decision about the tourniquet placement that she would not have made. Her pen stayed still. Two of the less critical patients had been routed to bays 3 and 4. Deshawn was moving equipment. Patrice was coordinating the incoming surgical team with the specific efficiency of someone who had managed surges before and had learned to conserve motion. The man in tactical clothing from the SUV was standing at the edge of Bay 1. He had not been asked to leave. No one had thought to ask him. He was watching Voss work with an expression that was not quite trust and not quite doubt, something precisely in between, the expression of a man calculating odds. Claire saw him look toward the monitor. She saw his jaw tighten. She looked back at her chart. Systolic 64. The vascular surgeon was 12 minutes out. She wrote a number on the chart. It was the wrong number. She crossed it out, rewrote it. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the problem. In the first weeks here, she had told herself it was acceptable to let the hands be steady as long as she stayed in her lane, stayed quiet. Did the support work that the role required and nothing beyond it? The steadiness was just physiology, a nervous system that had been recalibrated by years of performing under conditions that made a level 1 trauma bay look like a controlled laboratory. It didn't mean she had to use it. It didn't mean she had to be what she had been. She had made a choice. It had been a deliberate choice, arrived at after considerable time and one conversation she did not intend to revisit, and it had brought her here, to this floor, to these charts, to the specific and contained usefulness of a civilian nurse who did her job and went home, and did not ask her nervous system to perform at the level it was actually capable of. That was the choice. She had made it cleanly, and she did not regret it. She heard the monitor alarm. Systolic 59. Around her, the floor was absorbing the surge the way good trauma floors absorb surges, not gracefully exactly, but functionally. The less critical patients were being triaged, stabilized, moved to secondary bays. Patrice was running the floor communication with practiced efficiency. Two residents who had come down from the surgical floor were being deployed to the lateral cases. The system was doing what the system was built to do. It was Bay 1 that was the problem. It was always Bay 1. Where is vascular? Voss, sharper now. The performance was thinning at the edges. 11 minutes, someone answered. 11 minutes. She put down the pen. She did not move from the station. She stood with both hands on the counter, and she ran the numbers with the part of her mind that ran numbers automatically, the part that did not ask permission and did not particularly care what choice she had made 11 months ago, in a conversation she did not intend to revisit. Junctional femoral hemorrhage, combat tourniquet in place but unable to achieve occlusion. The location made full occlusion mechanically difficult, the inguinal crease, the angle of the pelvis. Voss had adjusted the tourniquet placement. She had heard the adjustment. It was the instinct of a trauma surgeon trained in civilian patterns, and it was not wrong exactly, but it was not right for this. Systolic 59 and falling, 11 minutes. The math was not good. She knew what the correct intervention was. She knew the anatomical approach. She knew the pressure point, the specific point against the pelvic brim where direct manual force, sustained and precise, could accomplish what the tourniquet could not. She knew because she had learned it in a course that was not listed in her civilian credentials. She had practiced it on a training aid in a facility that was not listed on any map she was cleared to share. She had performed it once in actual application, in the dark, in a location she was not cleared to name. The patient in Bay 1 was 28 years old. Claire could see his file photo in her mind, though she had never seen his file. Building it from the physical evidence, the calluses, the specific distribution of conditioning, the way the combat gauze had been packed, who had packed it, what that said about where he had been and what he had been doing when this happened. She knew the type. She had built the type. Her hands were flat on the counter. Systolic 57. Patrice appeared at her elbow. She didn't say anything. She just stood there for a moment looking at Claire's face, and then she looked at the bay, and then she looked back. She had worked this floor for 9 years. She had seen things that recalibrated a person's expectations of what human beings were capable of, both in terms of damage and in terms of repair. She was not easily unsettled. She looked unsettled now. Claire, I know. He's not going to make it to vascular. I know. A pause. Short, waited. Can you... Don't. Patrice was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "I'm not asking who you are. I'm asking if you can help that man." Claire looked at the bay. The monitor alarmed again. The man in tactical clothing at the edge of Bay 1 had his hands in fists at his sides. He was not looking at Voss anymore. He was looking at the monitor. He was doing the same math she was doing and arriving at the same answer: systolic 54. Claire pushed off the counter and walked toward Bay 1. Not running. Running created chaos, and chaos cost seconds. Moving at the pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going and what they would do when they arrived, a pace that looked, to the people she passed, like absolute certainty. It had a name, that pace. She had learned it a long time ago, in a different building under different circumstances, from a man who told her that the most dangerous thing an operator could do in a fluid situation was move as if they were uncertain. Uncertainty was contagious. Certainty was also contagious. The difference between them, in a room full of frightened people, was often the difference between chaos and control. That man had not crossed her mind in several months. Now he had. The bay doors were already open when she crossed the threshold, inside before Voss registered her presence. "Nurse, he needs direct pelvic brim compression." Her voice was level, no apology in it, no request. "The tourniquet placement won't achieve occlusion at this angle. You need manual pressure at the inguinal ligament sustained against the brim." Voss stared at her. "Excuse me?" "His pressure is falling. You have minutes." She was already at the bedside, already reading the wound, already positioning her hands. "I need gloves." Someone handed her gloves. She didn't look to see who. "Stop." Voss moved toward her. "This is not your procedure. You are a floor nurse and you will— His systolic is 51. She pulled on the gloves. "Call it, or step back." The monitor agreed with her. 51. The room went very still. Voss didn't step back. He was the kind of man who had never stepped back from anything in his life, not because he was brave, but because he had never been put in a position where stepping back was the only reasonable option. His entire career had been built in environments where his title was sufficient, where the shape of his authority was enough to end disagreements before they became confrontations. This was not that kind of moment. The monitor read 51. Claire looked at him, not the way she usually looked at him, with the careful flatness of a woman managing her own visibility. She looked at him directly, with the full weight of green eyes that had assessed harder situations than this one, and arrived at correct conclusions in considerably less time. "I know what I'm doing," she said. "You don't have to understand it, you just have to decide." 3 seconds passed. They felt longer. Then Voss stepped back. She didn't acknowledge it. She was already focused on the patient, on the wound, on the specific geometry of what needed to happen in the next 90 seconds if this man was going to remain alive long enough for the vascular surgeon to matter. "I need someone on that line," she said. "Keep the second bag running. I need the pressure reading every 30 seconds. I need a packed cell unit ready. And I need everyone to stop talking unless they have information I require." The bay organized itself around her. That didn't surprise her. Filed, moved past it. Both hands went to the inguinal crease, finding the anatomy by touch, the inguinal ligament, the angle of the femoral canal, the specific architecture that the tourniquet could not fully address at this placement, because the injury was too proximal, too close to the pelvic brim for external compression to achieve what it needed to achieve. Pressure applied. Not the pressure of a nurse managing a wound, the pressure of someone who understood the difference between force that bruises and force that occludes, the difference between the instinct to be gentle with an injured person and the knowledge that gentleness at the wrong moment is its own form of harm. She pressed her weight through her palms, through the heel of her right hand, into the specific point against the brim of the pelvis where the vessel could be compressed against bone. The patient made a sound. "I know," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Just for him. Stay with me. I've got you." She didn't know if he could hear her. She said it anyway, 30 seconds. "Systolic," she said. 53, the resident said. "Going up." "Keep the bag running." She held the pressure. Her arms were fully loaded, the position demanding a sustained force that would have fatigued most people inside 2 minutes. Her face showed nothing. Her breathing was controlled, slow, nasal. The specific pattern of someone managing a sustained physical load without allowing it to register in the body's visible systems. The man in tactical clothing at the edge of the bay had not moved. She was aware of him. She did not look at him. 60 seconds. Systolic? 58. One of the residents exhaled. She heard it, the sound of someone who had been holding their breath without realizing it, and had just been given permission to breathe again. Voss said nothing. She could feel him watching her, could feel the specific quality of the attention, no longer dismissive, no longer performing. Something harder and more careful than either of those things. He was trying to understand what he was seeing. He was a smart man in many of the ways that mattered professionally, and what he was seeing did not fit any category he had for the woman who had been restocking his supply cart 8 minutes ago. She kept the pressure. 90 seconds. 64. Rising. She made a small adjustment, a shift in hand position, 3 centimeters, calculated against the patient's specific anatomy. The kind of adjustment that required knowing not just the general location of the vessel, but the precise mechanical relationship between pressure point and bone at this particular angle in this particular body. It was not a nurse skill. She knew that. Everyone in the room was beginning to know that. 69, the resident said. There was something different in her voice now, something that was not quite reverence and not quite alarm. 2 minutes. The patient's color was changing. The concrete gray was retreating from his face very slowly, the way color returns, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small incremental signals of a body beginning to reclaim its own function. His hands, which had been empty and still at his sides, moved slightly. The fingers curled. She saw it. Something moved in her chest. The feeling she had been refusing for 11 months. She pressed it flat. Packed cells, she said, now. Someone moved. The unit went up. She held the pressure and monitored the line and counted the seconds, and did not look at anyone in the room except the patient, because the patient was the only thing in the room that mattered right now, and everything else. The weight of Voss's stare, the stillness of the man in tactical clothing, the residents with their recalibrated expressions, all of it, everything else could wait. 74. 3 minutes. She began to speak. Quietly, still only for the patient, a low and level voice that had no particular content, just sound, just presence, just the specific signal that someone is with you and intends to remain with you, which is sometimes the only thing that keeps a body from deciding to give up. She had done this before, in other rooms, for other men. She did not think about those rooms. 78, the resident said. Behind her, she heard Voss exhale. It was not a sound she had ever heard from him. It was not the exhale of a man who was right. It was the exhale of a man who was watching someone else be right in a way he could not account for and could not dismiss. And the combination of those two things was doing something to his understanding of the room he was standing in. Good. I need to maintain this until vascular arrives, she said. To the room now, not just to the patient. Position someone to relieve me if the pressure drops before then. I'll call for rotation if I need it. How long can you hold that? The resident asked. Claire considered the question. As long as I need to, she said. The man in tactical clothing moved for the first time since she had entered the bay. He took 2 steps forward, stopped at the foot of the gurney, looked at the patient, checked something internal, a rapid assessment that she recognized as the same rapid assessment she had run from the station, and then looked at her. Really looked. She felt it without meeting his eyes. He was looking at her hands, at the position, at the specific, trained geometry of what she was doing and how she was doing it, and the precise economy of effort it implied. The calculation running behind his eyes, she recognized it, had run it herself, about other people, in other circumstances, eyes on the patient. 81, the resident said. The room breathed. Voss moved to the other side of the gurney. He checked the line. He checked the monitor. He did the things a trauma surgeon does when he is doing his job, and for the first time since she had walked into this facility 11 weeks ago, he did them without speaking, without performing, without the narration that was usually the signal that he was reminding the room of its hierarchy. He was just working. She filed that too. The vascular surgeon arrived at 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Dr. Amara Singh, calm and efficient and already gloved, reading the room before she hit the doorway, the way surgeons read rooms when they have been called for something that has already been partially managed by someone they don't know. She looked at Claire, at the position, at the monitor reading. "What did she do?" Singh said. To no one specifically. No one answered immediately. "She held the brim," the resident finally said. Singh looked at the monitor again. 83 and stable. "Okay," she said. "Let's work." Claire transferred pressure to Singh's team carefully, maintaining occlusion through the handoff, releasing only when Singh confirmed she had the anatomy and the contact. She stepped back from the gurney. Her arms were shaking slightly, not from weakness, from the sustained output of a specific kind of force, the type that took something out of the body even when the body was built for it. She dropped her hands to her sides and stood still for a moment, letting the tremor settle. She looked up. The man in tactical clothing was 6 feet away. He was staring at her, not with surprise, not with confusion, with recognition. She saw it land in his face, the specific arrangement of recognition, the moment when a piece of information that has been assembling itself in the background finally reaches the front of the mind and produces certainty. His eyes moved to hers. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Then she stripped off her gloves, dropped them in the bin and walked out of Bay 1. She made it to the supply corridor before she had to stop. She put her back against the wall, both hands flat on the cool surface behind her. She breathed, slowly, deliberately, the same way she breathed through everything. The man had recognized her. She didn't know his face, but she knew the look. She had seen it before, in rooms that did not exist in any public record, on the faces of men who knew her by a different name and a different rank and a different version of herself, that she had decided very deliberately to leave behind. Someone knew she was here. She had about 90 seconds before he came looking. She stayed against the wall for 30 of them. Then she straightened, squared her shoulders, went back to work. His name was Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rourke. She learned that from his badge, which he had clipped to the chest of his tactical vest sometime between the ambulance bay and the moment he appeared in the supply corridor 7 minutes after. She had pressed her back against the wall and told herself she had 90 seconds before he came looking. She had been wrong about the timeline. He was faster than 90 seconds. She was restocking the crash cart when she heard the footsteps. She knew them before she turned, knew the cadence, the weight distribution, the specific pattern of someone trained to move with deliberate noise, because deliberate noise was less alarming than no noise at all, when approaching a person who would hear you coming regardless. She finished stacking the gauze packs. Then she turned. Rourke was 32, maybe 33, medium height, built close to the frame, the kind of conditioning that didn't announce itself until something required it. His face had the specific weathering of someone who had spent significant time outdoors in climates that were not gentle. And his eyes were the flat assessing color of a man who had learned that the first 3 seconds of looking at a person contain more information than the next 3 minutes of conversation. He was looking at her with those eyes now. She met them. "Chief," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise. He had already run past surprise. What shifted was a different kind of confirmation, the specific settling of a suspicion that has just been verified. She had used his rank. She had used it without reading it from his badge. She had used it the way you use a rank when you've already assessed the person, and the rank is simply the accurate word for what you're looking at. "You know who I am," he said. "I know what you are," she said. "The name I read off your badge." He studied her for a moment. Then, "That was not a standard intervention. The patient's alive. That's not what I said." She put the last of the gauze packs in place and closed the cart. "Is he stable?" "Dr. Singh has him. He'll make it." A pause. "Because of what you did. Because of what we all did. Don't." His voice was quiet, not hard, just precise. "Don't minimize it. I've been on enough tables to know the difference between someone who learned it in a classroom and someone who learned it in a ditch. She was silent. He waited. The supply corridor was empty except for the two of them. From the bay she could hear the low continuation of activity, the sounds of a trauma floor returning to its functional baseline after a surge, the specific audio of a system that has been tested and has held. "I'm not going to ask you directly," Rourke said. "That's not my place." "No," she said, "it isn't. But someone is going to ask. What happened in that bay doesn't stay in that bay. The doctor—" He paused, chose his words. "The doctor is already asking questions." "Dr. Voss can ask whatever he wants." "It's not Voss I'm concerned about." She looked at him. "My CO is inbound," he said. "He's coming to see the team. That's standard. He'll come through the floor." A beat. "He knows everyone. He has for a long time." The sentence was structured carefully. She heard what was inside it. "That's fine," she said. "Is it?" She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked up the empty supply bin and stepped around him toward the bay. He didn't follow her, but he didn't look away either. She could feel it, the sustained attention of someone who has identified a thing they don't yet fully understand and has decided to keep watching until they do. It was a familiar sensation. She had produced it in people before, in other contexts. She had also been the person doing the watching, and she knew what it meant when it settled on you. The clock was moving. She went back to work. The next 40 minutes were dense. 2 of the other SEAL casualties required secondary interventions. 1 a wound reassessment. 1 a medication adjustment that the attending had calculated incorrectly, and that she corrected by rerunning the weight-based dosing in her head and presenting the correct number to the resident before the order went through. The resident looked at her. "I did the math twice," she said. The resident did the math, changed the order, said nothing else. Voss found her at the central station at 3:14. He didn't lead with anything diagnostic this time. He didn't lead with a task or a chart or a directive about scope of practice. He stood on the other side of the station and looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, one that was considerably less certain than his usual register. "Where did you train?" he said. "I have my credentials on file." "I've seen your credentials," he paused. "They don't explain what I saw in Bay 1. She kept her eyes on the chart. "I've worked a lot of floors." "That wasn't floor experience, Dr. Voss. That was not something you learn on a floor." His voice was controlled, but the control was effortful. She could hear the effort. Junctional hemorrhage management at that level, that positioning, that pressure, that is a very specific skill set. It is taught in very specific programs that don't appear anywhere in your file. She looked up. She held his gaze. "Your file," she said, "is whatever HR has on record." A silence. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "That's your right." He looked at her for another moment. Then he left. She watched him go. She had known this was coming. Not this exact shape of it. Not this specific conversation on this specific afternoon. But the general architecture of it. The moment when the gap between what she appeared to be and what she had actually done became too large to paper over with credentials and deflection. She had known it would come eventually. She had built her life here around the assumption that eventually was far away. It had arrived. She went back to the chart. Her pen moved at the same steady pace it always moved. At 3:40, the hospital administrator appeared. His name was Gerald Fitch. She knew him by sight, a compact, careful man in his early 50s, who wore his authority in the soft way of someone who preferred that authority to be felt rather than stated. He managed the facility with the specific political sensitivity of a man who understood that his job was to protect the institution, and that protecting the institution sometimes required uncomfortable conversations with people on his payroll. He found her at the medication window. "Ms. Maddox." Not hostile, not warm, the precise middle ground of a man who had been briefed on something and was reserving judgment until he had more information. "Do you have a moment?" She capped the syringe she was labeling. "Of course." They stepped into the small conference room off the main corridor. Fitch closed the door. He had a tablet in one hand and the particular posture of someone who has already rehearsed this conversation. "I've had a report," he said, "regarding your involvement in a procedure in Bay 1 this afternoon." "The patient's alive," she said. "I understand that." He sat. She didn't. "Dr. Voss has raised concerns about scope of practice, about credentials, about the nature of the intervention you performed. The intervention was appropriate to the situation, perhaps." He looked at the tablet. "But it raises questions about your background that I'm not currently able to answer from your file." He looked up. "Are there things in your background that aren't reflected in the file we have on record?" She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Fitch," she said, "the patient came in with a systolic of 54 and a junctional bleed that the tourniquet placement couldn't fully address. The vascular surgeon was 11 minutes out. I performed a manual pelvic brim compression that stabilized his pressure until Dr. Singh could complete the repair." She paused. "That patient is alive, the others are stable. Whatever questions you need to ask them. But ask them after the floor is cleared and the patients are managed." Fitch looked at her for a long moment. He was a careful man. She could see him being careful now, weighing the institutional risk of an unexplained intervention against the institutional risk of questioning the person responsible for a patient who was alive instead of dead. "We'll continue this conversation," he said. "I expect we will," she said. She left the conference room before he could add anything. At the nurse's station, Patrice caught her eye across the room. Patrice had seen the Fitch conversation, had seen Voss's conversation before it, had seen all of it, and had said nothing. And the nothing she was saying now was the specific, considered nothing of a woman who has decided to wait. Claire looked at her. Patrice gave the smallest possible nod. It meant, "I'm here," it meant, "I see you," it meant underneath both of those things. Whatever you are, it was enough today. Claire nodded back. Then she heard the doors at the far end of the corridor open. She heard the footsteps. Not one person, several. Rourke's voice reached her first. Brief, directed, the tone of a man speaking to someone above him in a chain that both of them understood implicitly. Then the answering voice. Claire didn't move. Eyes on the chart. Pen still. But something in the back of her neck went very still. That voice. The last time she had heard it was 3 years ago. In a room that didn't appear in any building schematic available to the public, in a conversation that had lasted 47 minutes and ended with a decision she had thought at the time was final. Wrong about that, apparently. Eyes on the chart. Don't look up. The footsteps came down the corridor. She did not look up. Rear Admiral Marcus Webb was 6 feet 2 inches tall, had served 31 years in naval special warfare, and had the specific physical presence of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the wrong posture cost lives. He walked like that now. Even in civilian clothes, in a dark jacket, no insignia, nothing that announced what he was to anyone who didn't already know. He walked like a man who carried rank in his body rather than on his collar. 2 members of his security detail flanked him at a distance that was designed to look casual and wasn't. Rourke was behind them, all of it registered without a single glance backward. Her complete picture of the corridor behind her, assembled from sound alone, eyes on the chart. Webb stopped at the nurse's station. She could feel it, the arrival of his attention in the room, the specific shift that happened when someone of that particular caliber directed their focus at a point in space. She had been on the producing end of that focus many times. She knew what it felt like to receive it. "I'd like to check on my team," he said. To Patrice. His voice was even, courteous, the voice of a man who understood that courtesy in civilian spaces was a form of operational discipline. "Of course," Patrice said. "I can take you to—" "In a moment." A pause. She kept her eyes on the chart. Her pen did not move. "Claire Maddox," Webb said. This moment had always been coming. The pen went down. Claire turned. He was looking at her the way Rourke had looked at her, but deeper. The recognition more complete, more layered, carrying the specific weight of someone who had known her, not just by sight, but by a long record of decisions made and outcomes produced in circumstances that neither of them would describe in this corridor. She met his eyes. Neither of them spoke for 3 seconds. Behind Webb, she was aware of the corridor. She was aware of Voss, who had appeared from the direction of the surgical suite and had stopped when he saw Webb's party. She was aware of Patrice still watching. She was aware of the 2 residents who had come out of Bay 2 and were standing near the equipment wall with the expressions of people who don't know what they're watching but understand that they are watching something. She was aware of all of it. She kept her eyes on Webb. "Admiral," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, but a complex and layered acknowledgement of something that had been unresolved for a long time and was now, in this corridor, under these fluorescent lights, being resolved. "Admiral Maddox," he said. The corridor went completely silent. She held very still. Webb turned to the 2 members of his security detail. A look passed between them, brief, unspoken, the communication of people who operate inside a shared understanding. Both men straightened. Then Webb did something that she had not expected. He came to attention. Not the loose, social attention of a military man in a civilian setting, making a courteous gesture. The real thing. Full military attention, spine vertical, shoulders back, chin level, every line of his body aligned in the posture that the Navy had spent 3 decades building into his muscle memory. He held it. 1 beat. Then he inclined his head. Not a nod. Not a social acknowledgement, but the specific gesture of a senior officer rendering respect to a peer. "It's good to see you," he said. His detail had come to attention with him. Rourke, behind them, had come to attention with them. She heard, from the direction of Bay 1, movement, and she knew without looking that the SEAL casualties who were conscious and mobile enough had heard and had come to the doorway and were standing there, watching, and some of them had understood what they were watching before she did, because they were closer to that world than she had been allowing herself to be. She stood in the middle of the corridor in worn blue scrubs, with her ID badge slightly crooked, and her dark hair cut close to her skull, and she did not move for a long moment. Then she straightened. It happened the way it always happened when she let it. Automatically from the body, the spine finding its correct alignment, the shoulders settling back to where they belonged, the chin leveling. The posture she had spent years building and years suppressing, emerging now without effort or decision, because some things do not leave the body regardless of what the mind decides. She was 5'6". She felt taller. "Stand easy," she said. They did. Webb relaxed. His detail relaxed. Rourke relaxed. The formality of the moment softened without dissolving entirely, the way formality softens between people who share a long history and a mutual understanding that ceremony has its place, but this is not a ceremony. This was a hallway, and she was still wearing scrubs. "How long?" Webb said. 11 months. He nodded. He didn't ask why. She had the sense that he already knew most of the why, or could reconstruct it from available information, and that the question of how long was the only question he considered appropriate to ask in this space. "The patient," she said. "Petty officer, he'll make it." Webb's voice was quiet. "Rourke told me what you did. I did my job." "You did considerably more than your job." A pause. "You've been doing considerably more than your job for 11 months, from what I understand." She looked at him. He looked back. "Patrice," he said, without breaking eye contact with Claire. "Yes," Patrice said from somewhere to the left. "Has she been a good nurse?" A silence that lasted exactly long enough to contain a small private decision. "She's the best nurse I've ever worked with," Patrice said. Webb held Claire's gaze for another moment. "Of course she is," he said. Voss moved. She heard it. The specific sound of Harlan Voss remembering that he was supposed to be in charge of something in this building and repositioning himself accordingly. He came down the corridor with the bearing of a man reclaiming territory, which was the only mode of locomotion he had when uncertain. "Excuse me." He stopped at the edge of the group. He had read Webb the way a man like Voss read people, assessing status, assessing threat, calibrating response. Whatever he had read had recalibrated him somewhat. His voice was not the voice he used on floor nurses. It was closer to the voice he used on administrators. I'm Dr. Harlan Voss, Chief of Surgery. I'm not sure I know who you are, Webb said. Voss absorbed this. Then you understand I have some concerns about what happened in my trauma bay this afternoon, regarding credentials, regarding scope of Dr. Voss. Webb's voice had not changed in volume. It had changed in something else, a quality that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with weight. Voss stopped. The woman you have been working with, Webb said, is Rear Admiral Claire Maddox, retired. She served as commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Command for 3 years before her separation. Before that, she spent 11 years as a Nest Dalaf operator and surgeon, deploying across 6 theaters. She has performed emergency surgical interventions in conditions you and I will never experience. She has kept people alive who had no reasonable statistical right to be alive. He paused. She has been stocking your supply cart and restocking your crash cart and charting your patients and doing whatever work you assigned her without complaint for 11 months. Voss was very still. The procedure she performed today, Webb continued, is a standard field technique for her. What is not standard is the patience she has shown in not performing it sooner. Another pause. The kind of pause that a man uses when he wants the person he is speaking to understand that what follows is not a statement, but a fact being delivered with the courtesy it doesn't require. The patient in Bay 1 is alive because of her. You might want to factor that in when you're making your calls. Voss opened his mouth, closed it. His face was doing something complicated that she did not need to study closely to understand. The look on his face needed no analysis. Claire had understood it for 11 months. The look of a man who had organized his world around a hierarchy that had just been restructured without his permission. Discovering the reorganization was not reversible. No satisfaction came. She had expected it to. In her lowest moments here, she had imagined something like this and noticed the satisfaction it produced. A small human response to an unpleasant situation. Forgivable. Now that it was here, what came instead was something quieter, more tired, more complicated. She looked at Voss. The patient in Bay 4 needs his wound reassessment at 1600, she said. I'll be there. Voss said nothing. She turned back to Webb. Will you stay? She said. As long as you'll have me, he said. She looked at him, at this man who had known her longer than almost anyone still living, who had watched her build herself into something that most people would not believe existed, and some people today had been forced to learn to believe. And she felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying a very large thing alone for a very long time. It was not an unpleasant exhaustion. It was the exhaustion of a thing set down. She had not expected it to feel like that. She had imagined this moment in many configurations over 11 months, and in most of them, it had felt like a door opening onto something uncertain. What it felt like was simpler. It felt like standing up straight. Coffee is terrible here, she said. Webb almost smiled. I've had worse, he said. Behind them, the floor resumed its work. And for the first time in 11 months, Claire Maddox stood in the middle of it without rounding her shoulders. The coffee was, in fact, terrible. Webb held the cup with both hands and looked at it with the expression of a man who had consumed far worse things in far worse places and had therefore lost the ability to complain about anything served in a ceramic mug under electric light. They were in the small break room off the main corridor. The door was open. She had left it open deliberately, not because she had anything to hide, but because closed doors in this building had started to feel like a statement, and she was done making that particular statement. Webb set the cup down. The program wants you back, he said. She had known this was coming too. I know, she said, not as an operator. You'd be designing the medical curriculum for the next generation of 18 Deltas, writing the protocols, training the trainers. He looked at her steadily. It would be classified, but it would be here, stateside. You wouldn't have to go back into the field. She was quiet for a moment. That's a generous offer, she said. It's an accurate offer. We need what you know. We've always needed what you know. The only thing that changed 11 months ago is that you stopped letting us access it. She looked at the table. The break room was small and slightly cluttered in the way of spaces shared by many people across long shifts. A shelf of mismatched mugs, a corkboard with outdated notices, a microwave with a door that didn't close fully. She had eaten lunch in here more times than she could count. She had sat in this specific chair and eaten a sandwich, and stared at nothing, and felt the particular quiet of a person who has successfully hidden themselves from the world for another day. It had not always felt like success. "I left for a reason," she said. "I know why you left." "Then you know it wasn't about the work." "I know." His voice was careful. Losing him was, "Don't." Not sharp, just firm. The word of a woman who has built a wall around a specific room and is not ready to open it in a break room over bad coffee. "That's not why I'm telling you this." Webb was quiet for a moment. "Then tell me why." She looked up. "Because I think I was wrong," she said. He waited. "Not about leaving. I needed to leave. I needed to stop being that person for a while, or I was going to stop being any kind of person at all." She paused. "But I think I was wrong about what came after. I came here and I made myself small. I told myself it was a choice, humility, starting over." She looked at the mug in front of her. "I think it was something else." "Fear," Webb said. She didn't deny it. "Being seen again," she said. "Being what I actually am, in rooms where people can watch it happen. After everything, I wasn't sure I wanted that anymore. And now?" She thought about the bay, about the patient's hands, empty and then curled, about Patrice's voice saying she was the best nurse she had ever worked with, and the specific weight of that sentence, not because it was a compliment, but because it was true. And the reason it was true was the same reason she had spent 15 years doing what she had done before this, which was that she did not know how to do anything halfway, and she never had. She thought about the corridor, about standing up straight. "Something happened today," she said. "When I walked into that bay, it wasn't noble. I didn't decide to be brave, I just—" She stopped, started again. "The math was wrong, and I knew how to fix it, and the man was going to die, and everything I spent 15 years learning was right there in my hands, and I could either use it, or I could watch him die to protect a secret that wasn't even protecting me anymore." Webb said nothing. "I used it," she said, "and it felt like the first honest thing I'd done in 11 months. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that exists between people who have known each other long enough that silence has its own vocabulary. Webb picked up the coffee, looked at it again, set it back down. "The offer stands," he said. "When you're ready, there's no timeline. I know. And if you decide you want to stay here, I know that too." He looked at her. Something in his face was very still and very warm at the same time. The specific expression of a man who has carried responsibility for a long time and is deeply familiar with the look of someone else doing the same. "I'm glad you're all right," he said. "I wasn't certain you were." She looked at him. "I wasn't certain either," she said, "for a while." She stood. He stood. They walked back to the floor together. Harlan Voss was waiting, not blocking, not performing. He was standing near the nurse's station with his hands in his coat pockets and the expression of a man who has spent the last 2 hours rearranging furniture in a room he thought he understood and has arrived at a layout that is deeply unfamiliar. He looked at Claire when she came down the corridor. She looked back. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Voss took a breath. "The patient in Bay 4, he said. "His wound reassessment. I looked at the chart." A pause that had several things inside it. "You flagged a possible early compartment syndrome 2 hours ago, in the notes." She said nothing. "I missed it," he said. 2 words. The specific weight of 2 words from a man who did not say them often, to whom they cost something real. She met his eyes. "The pressure reading is borderline," she said. "Check it again at 1700. If it's up even marginally, call vascular back." He nodded. She moved past him to the station. He did not say anything else. She did not need him to. She had not come here for an apology. She had not come here to be vindicated or to watch a man like Voss diminish. She had no interest in his diminishment. What she had interest in, what she had always had interest in, if she was being honest about the through line of her life, was the patient, the next patient, The work in front of her and the knowledge in her hands and the specific and irreducible satisfaction of doing something correctly in a moment that required it to be done correctly. That had not changed. She thought about the version of herself that had walked into this building 11 months ago, head down, shoulders curved, taking up as little space as possible, as if smallness were a form of safety. She had confused that for a long time. Safety was the absence of threat. Peace was something you had to build. She had been trying to build it from absence of visibility, absence of history. She had learned today that you cannot build a thing from nothing. What she had was considerable. It had always been considerable. Voss opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at her for one more moment. This woman who had restocked his crash cart and absorbed his condescension without comment for 11 months, who had walked into his trauma bay and done the thing that needed doing while he stood with his authority unraveling. And whatever he had come here to say, he decided not to say it. He nodded, once. Then he walked away. She watched him go. It was the thing about her that had never changed, not in 15 years of missions and deployments and rooms that didn't exist in any public record, and not in 11 months of supply carts and charting and deliberate invisibility. It was the only thing she was certain of. Patrice found her at the medication window at 4:58. She stood beside her for a moment without speaking, the way Patrice did things, with a quietness that was not absence, but presence, the kind of presence that didn't demand acknowledgement. "You're staying," Patrice said. It wasn't a question. Claire looked at her. "I'm staying," she said. Patrice nodded. Something moved in her face. Not surprise, not relief exactly, but the specific settling of a person who has been hoping for a particular answer and has just received it. "Good," she said. She handed Claire a chart. Claire took it. The floor was entering its evening rhythm, the shift change approaching, the day's cases moving toward resolution, the particular quiet that settled over a trauma center in the space between one surge and the next. It was not peaceful exactly. It was the quiet of a held breath. The quiet of a system that had been tested and had held, and was preparing to be tested again. 11 months spent in that quiet, trying to disappear inside it. Done with that now. The chart opened in her hands and Claire read it with the full weight of everything she was. The surgeon and the operator and the officer and the nurse. All of it. None of it hidden. None of it apologized for. And she began to work. Behind her, somewhere in the corridor, she heard Rourke's voice and Webb's answer, and the sound of the SEAL team moving toward the exit. She heard one of them, the critical patient, already on his feet, which was either remarkable or entirely predictable depending on what you knew about that particular type of person, say something she didn't catch. She heard the quiet laughter that followed. She smiled, just slightly, eyes still on the chart. The lesson she had learned 11 months ago, and relearned today in a trauma bay with her hands pressed against a stranger's pelvis and a monitor screaming. The lesson was this: you cannot make yourself small enough to be safe. You can only make yourself small enough to be useless, and useless was the only thing she refused to be. She turned the page. She kept working. Outside the window, the city moved on in its enormous, indifferent way. And inside Mercy Trauma Center, in worn blue scrubs with her spine straight and her shoulders back, and her ID badge slightly crooked because some things don't change, Rear Admiral Claire Maddox, retired, did what she had always done. She showed up. She did the work. She saved the ones she could. The end.
If this story hits you somewhere deep, hit that like button and let it run, then drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from right now. I read every single one, and if you're new here, welcome. You just found secrets of silent badges. Hit subscribe and stay close. You're going to want to hear what comes next.